that applied a colossal strain right from the beginning. So the financial strain on me was enormous, absolutely enormous. Even then, I think it's a very lonely place to be, where you don't want to show any weakness. I was probably starting to fight with this condition within the inside of me. So I was stretching myself to such a limit, and at the same time, I would I was hiding. I was hiding in the reality of really what was going on. To manage my mind and my physical state at that time was incredibly challenging. I took drugs. I did take drugs. At one point, what the hell is happening to me? With bipolar, everyone seems to have a different journey. When I was sectioned, I met a lot of people that were, Jesus Christ, John the Baptist, all that kind of stuff. You go from an elevated to a heightened, to being really deeply insightful, to being totally sightless. Well, for a long time last year, suicide was the only thing I could see as the way out.
Okay, welcome to BroTalk, and today I'm here to welcome our guest, Christopher, who's got a very, very interesting background. Welcome, Christopher.
Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for asking me. I'm very, very touched that you even asked me.
No problem at all. You're clearly a fit man because you're playing paddle after this.
I'm fitter than I was.
Okay.
I've been a lot fitter than this, but that's part of the journey that I've gone through over the last 18, 20 months. So but I'm playing paddle after this twice a week with the boys and reconnecting.
Good. So we established almost 2 weeks ago when we first connected that we've got a shared South London background.
Streatham.
Yes,
Streatham Balham. I mean, it was 2005 was when I left there, but I was there for 6 years in 2005, and then what happened to me at that point with I had a manic episode, and that pulled me out of there and brought me down to Mallorca. So the whole journey is kind of done like a bookend.
Wow.
I wasn't expecting it. It wasn't a chapter I wanted to write either way, but there's always, they say things happen for a reason. So, admittedly, you only see that in hindsight, but we'll see what comes next.
So you were running a pub that my wife and I used to frequent.
Oh, that's absolutely right. It was the Bedford at Balham. I sold my apartment in London to buy the Bedford. Wow. So talk about putting my neck.
Was that a spur of the moment? Was it planned?
Looking back on it, probably it was a spur of the moment. It was also a lot of naivety. It was a lot of ambition. It was a lot of there was maybe I hadn't looked at the two sides of the scale. But one thing I'm very proud of is it was a place that changed a lot of things. It changed a lot of things about the pub industry. It changed a lot of things about people, and this was all down to the people working with me.
Right,
amazing people. And the Bedford went to a dark old boozer on the corner of Balham High Street, covered in train soot and all this kind of stuff. To one of the most celebrated and prestigious pubs, and had a global reputation.
The period of your life?
Yes, it was. It was an extraordinary period of my life. I got back into music and arts venues, and what I realised, and it's always the same thing, what you realise that I'd learned and what I'd missed and all the mistakes I made became more apparent after the equation. But in terms of what she was and what the Bedford is and still is and what she was and the people there, I don't think I made a mistake on one side. I took on I hate the word devious. I took on a business partner who took advantage of my mental health.
Okay.
And that not only it's ungrateful. I mean, I had an episode, and he basically used that episode to manipulate my partnership with him, and I lost everything overnight.
Okay.
And that actually put me not only in the hospital but also out on the streets. Mm-hmm. So that was a very, very, very the first seismic episode of my life.
Okay. That's one of the main reasons we invite you to speak today, and thank you for taking that time and your vulnerability. And as you know, with BroTalk, we're very passionate and determined about promoting mental health and importance, particularly with men, because it's not shouted enough about and that's not done enough. Can you give us more insight in terms of the episode that you experienced? And
I suppose, up until September the 11th, 2001 was when I had my first episode.
Mm-hmm.
It's up until that point, I was kind of happy-go-lucky guy, doing good things, making mistakes, doing all that kind of stuff. I suppose living a mumble-tumbled life. And as I said, I sold my apartment and I bought the Bedford, and my whole vision was coming to light. It was extraordinary, actually. I remember walking around the Bedford, and when I first saw it, because I got caught in the one-way system coming out of Streatham, because everyone said, you talk like this, you have a voice like this, you went to public school, you got to have a place in Chelsea or Fulham. And I didn't want that. I wanted to create a place. I'm very much a traditionalist. I wanted to create a place that anyone could go. It was a public house. And so for some reason, I swept myself across to, and I was driving around Streatham and Brixton, Streatham, and I got caught in the one-way system, and it brought me down the side of Fernley Road, which stretches down the common from there. And I stopped at the set of traffic lights, and there was the Bedford, 16,000 square foot on 4 floors on a Friday evening. And it was dark and dingy and everything else, but it was packed, and it just didn't make sense. And I had the most extraordinary deja vu. I just thought, I know this place, but someone must have told me. Anyway, it was Saturday night. That was it, and I couldn't understand it. Why is it so packed? And why is it so grotty? And why is it so packed? Anyway, I decided to go back and look at it, and I couldn't shake this feeling. Went back on the Sunday, and I walked in, and it was empty. It was absolutely empty, except for 4 guys sitting down. There was a guy called James who was an artist. There was another guy, and I keep thinking his name's Michael, but he was in the city. And there was a guy called Harry who looked like Father Christmas with Molly, and then Harry Mole. And then there was another guy called, I have to use the word, his nickname was Fuck Off Dave, because every other word was fuck off. But they were just nattering. And then there was this wonderfully bubbly lady behind the bar, and that was it. So suddenly it had gone from hundreds of people. And anyway, I walked up to the bar, and I tried to kind of shake down the fact that I wasn't looking. I was just popping in, and so I kind of made up some rubbish about the fact that I wanted to go and have a look around the pub. Because I was thinking of doing a party or something like that. And this woman just looked at me and said, "Only if you want to buy it." And I looked at her and said, "Excuse me." She said, "You're not here to do a party." And I said,
"It's all right, true."
Yeah, and I said, "Is it for sale?" And she said, "Yes." So I went back in on the Monday, I was shown around, I made an offer on the Tuesday, and it was accepted a week later. And the 2nd of August, 1999, went in, and it was amazing. We never shut the pub. It traded every single day, even when it was having asbestos. One, I couldn't afford it because cash flow was king. And I didn't have the backing investment. The banks kept saying to me, no, we can't give you the money. So I literally had to do it out of the business's pocket, in a sense. And that applied a colossal strain right from the beginning. So the financial strain on me was enormous, absolutely enormous. And I had a business partner at the time, Johnny Clements, and that put a strain on our relationship. And I ended up not long after, probably about 7 or 8 months afterwards, it was just agreed that we were going in different directions. And he went off and became very successful up in Scotland. A brilliant man. And I have, there's no ill feeling, never was an ill feeling. It was just, putting people together is one of the most challenging things, especially when you don't know each other that well. And so I carried on, and it was just this constant thing. So meanwhile, financially, it was always, it was a big investment. It was like £800,000 to refurb the place.
Back then as well.
Back then, back then, exactly. So, I know when they did the recent one, it was millions. But so I had to hang on to that, and at the same time also keep the buzz and the life, because everything was word of mouth. And so on one level, it just went through the ceiling, and financially it kind of kept going on that way. And I think it was, even then, I think it's a very lonely place to be, where you don't want to show any weakness. You don't want to show, I can do this, it's no problem at all. I had amazing people around me. And I mean, tolerance, they put the capitals into every single letter. Because I wasn't easy, because on another side, I was probably starting to fight with this condition within the inside of me. And so I'd have mood swings. Now, could they be determined towards a condition, or are they determined towards the fact that you've got £500,000 overdraft, you've got to do this, you've got to do that? And what's my solution? I'll go and buy another pub. And the second pub really was down in Bristol. So not only did I buy another pub, I bought 120 miles away, and that was all based on ego. And it was done that. And then I bought another pub near the Bedford and Clapham Common. And so I was stretching myself to such a limit. And at the same time, I would I was hiding. I was hiding in the reality of really what was going on, and not hiding away from my responsibility or what I needed to do. I was to manage my mind and my physical state at that time was incredibly challenging. And I, I didn't really drink. I took drugs. I did take drugs, and the trouble with those kind of things, then that suddenly becomes the defining factor. Forget what's going on at the moment. If you take drugs, that's it. It suddenly becomes the cap holder.
Yeah.
And so I suppose it just time built up. I mean, and yes, I mean, I absolutely loved it. I mean, there's still to this day I think of it, and it was just one of the most remarkable times of my life, and it really changed so much for so many people, and not just the community. For me, it was about a community business.
Okay.
There was about 27, 28 businesses within it. So, when I walked in, it was, as you said, it was the comedy, and it was the quiz night, and I think it was line dancing on a Monday night, and that was it. And later on, it was literally everything you could wish for. I mean, the music was incredibly important. I could see the vision when I walked around the pub. It was the first time when I saw it. I walked and I could see the people dancing. I could see the musicians, and everything about the Bedford was about supporting people within the arts. Everything had to be live. It was all about, for me at that time, obviously, Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff didn't exist really. It didn't exist at that time. So for me, it was all about the spoken word. It was all about, I mean, the staff were incredible, the manager's incredible, all the team were incredible, because that's what was it's wrong to say the same point, but that's what was the real soul of the pub. It's the people within it. And, people would come in and sit down, and it created this massive community and popularity, and it just sprung off everywhere. And it was like the Manchester United of buildings. I suppose I'm going on.
So it's word of mouth how it spread.
Absolutely, and I knew it worked. I really knew it worked when a journalist from Sydney turned up to do an article. So we won all the different awards, and yes, there is a process behind all the awards, but and so towards the end of my tenure, when finances were really causing me a huge strain, the pressure on me, and I had to dump this pub in Bristol and blah, blah, blah. When they offered me an award, I said, I can't take it. They said, you've got to take it. They said, you've got to take it. I said, I can't take it. Because I can't sit there and say we are the best of, when actually it's only X% above the waterline. It's like an iceberg. What one sees on one side is not what was happening behind the scenes. And I remember I refused to go to the award ceremony and all this stuff. I was also in a very, very, very dark place. I was finding it very difficult. So anyway, two guys went along and said to me very sweetly, and they were sitting there, and they got the first award, which we knew we were going to get. But the reason they wanted to get the award is because they'd created a special award, which was best pub in the country.
Wow.
So they were sitting there. So when they were and I got this call afterwards saying we won. I know we won. And they said, no, we won. And they started describing the Bedford, and my colleagues that were there at the time, and I suppose friends, I could arguably say at that time friends, they just sat there going, hang on a second, this sounds like something we know. And it was extraordinary, and that was a huge compliment, not obviously a massive compliment to me, but to everyone involved.
Yeah.
And that also meant the people that had come and gone and whatever. But it set light to something, and this equally was after. So yeah, so I took over the pub in 1999, and the pressure was really building up like a pressure cooker. And it was September the 11th, 2001. And I was down in the pub in Bristol, and that was really having a tough time. There's a lack of honesty from the brewery about how good the pub was. So I actually walked into a mess.
Okay.
And everything had been oversold to me, oversold, and I overpaid. So I was fighting, and it was draining everything and everywhere. And I used to commute backwards and forwards, my two Newfoundlands in the back between London and Bristol. And I remember we were standing there, and everyone kind of remembers where they were, Moon Landing, Dinah's Death, the Twin Towers. And I remember standing there and watching it like everyone else. I mean, the world stood still. And my mother, my sister, my brother-in-law, and my nephew were in New York, and my father was in Washington. So it was like, holy shit, this is, Houston, we have a problem. This is serious. And I remember, everyone was all right. Everyone was kind of stunned. I mean, no one cared about what was going on over the tills that day. It was more the stunned. And then I decided I was going to drive back to London. And I drove back to London, and normally I'd drive, and put the dogs in the back, turn the music on, drive down the motorway, and it was great fun. I remember I just drove in silence. It was like this, drove back in silence. And I pulled up the Bedford and I walked in, I was dying for a pee. And I walked in and you could feel it. I mean, it was tangible. I mean, you literally could feel the energy everywhere. It was extraordinary. And I went to the loo because I was dying for a pee, left the dogs outside with the boots open, just run in. And I'm going to say it, there was this postcard that caught my eye, and it was a postcard in a marketing postcard rack. We didn't normally do it, but we did our own. We had so many, but I've been away for a bit, so this one that caught his eye, and it was a drawing of a plane going across the New York skyline, going into two things which were where the Twin Towers used to be, and this massive sun behind it, and it was designed 8 months beforehand, but it triggered something in me. It was like I went down a rabbit hole which I was neither looking for or anticipating at all.
Yeah.
And that was when I started to develop this higher side of mania. And it really shocked a lot of people. They could deal with, Chris was eccentric, Chris was this, Chris had a lot of energy and all that kind of stuff. This was a different ballgame. I was starting to talk and think right out of the box. I was talking about numerology, I was talking about all the esoterics, I was talking about timelines, this and that and everything else. And it started to shake the foundations. And I ended up running away. I ended up kind of having to hide because they wanted to do an intervention. And I ran all the way up Balham Common. I ran all the way back down to Balham Common. And I was kind of almost hiding out in the bushes. And I ended up jumping in my car and driving up to a girlfriend's house up in where is it? Just outside Stoke. And I was there, and her parents were absolutely lovely. And I remember walking in the door, and her father was standing there, and he just looked at me and he was not what I would call the most tactile person, but he just opened his arms and hugged me. And he said, "You can stay. You just need some rest and stay." But unbeknown to me, the machine was working behind the scenes. And the next day, I think it was the next day or the day after, a doctor turned up. Someone from social services turned up, and a kind of, I suppose, security, heavyweight. And they interviewed me, and that took me by surprise because, how did they suddenly find out where I was? But as I said, people have been in contact with my parents and everything else because, the one thing we tend to forget sometimes is what affects the family, friends, everyone else on the outside. Because when you're in that storm, that's the only thing that you can hold on to. And they interviewed me, and they kind of looked at me and said, well, we did this interview in the kitchen. And I remember the person did, I think it was the doctor did, the psychiatrist did the interview. I was chatting away, but I was able to compress and suppress the manic. I kind of was still able to hang on to a huge part of reality. So in a way, the interview was elevated, but it wasn't manic. And I remember the psychiatrist turning around to this wonderful man, John Prendergast, saying, is what he's saying is true? Because everything I was saying was true. I was just not necessarily, do you hear voices? Well, I didn't hear voices. I just heard my intuition. I mean, I didn't step into those potholes.
Okay.
They were asking me. And I remember him turning around to John and saying, is what he's saying true? And John looked at him and said, look, Chris, and I say this modestly because it was for me. He said, Chris is one of the brightest people I know. And and then they turned around to me. They said, it was kind of like the judges from X Factor now. They then went outside and they kind of went into another room. And then they came back and said, look, we don't think there's any point, there's no need to take you in, have you sectioned. And I didn't really know what that was at that time. You just need a good rest. And I remember they left and I just burst out crying. John was so sweet. He had the kind of certificate saying this is a get out of jail free card. But I at that point, I wasn't dealing with the condition.
Okay.
I had got out of jail free,
Yeah.
but I hadn't actually, I hadn't been signed off as bipolar. And it wasn't till, and then I stayed up there for a while. And even the staff said, look, you've got to get well. You can't come back. And that was like a red rag to a bull. I said, you can't stop me coming back in my own pub. So I used to drive down from Stoke And you're talking about the street angels. I used to drive down from Stoke like 11 or 12 o'clock at night, arrive at the Bedford, walk around the building, at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So if anyone thinks they saw ghosts, it was me. And then I'd leave, but no one was going to stop me, going to, I had to. It was something I felt totally pulled away. It's something that I'd put so much into.
Yeah.
So then I did go back and kind of made a very public apology to everyone, all my staff, and it was a big crew. And we carried on. And then it was when I think it was when the next episode hit, that's when I got sectioned, and it was much more specific to bipolar 1. So this would have been about 2002. Yeah, 2002. And I think I never fully accepted it. I don't think I fully did I fully realize it. I don't think I really fully accept it or respect it. I think that's the difficulty. So I kind of had these waves that went on, and then ultimately there was the kind of final straw was January 2005, and at that point my business partner kind of orchestrated an intervention, but at the same time orchestrated the ability to eradicate me from the business, and for him to take it away from me and basically saying that any agreement I had with him was a figment of my imagination. So yeah, I mean, I probably got sectioned in that second half probably 3 times. I think I went in once, which was, my parents' cost. And, it was terrifying for them. And then I came out of that, went back, and then I didn't look after myself enough. I think it's time to be honest. I didn't maintain the medication schedule that I should have done. It was always kind of like, I'm feeling better, these things make me feel sick or whatever. And then I went the second time, which I escaped from, and then the third time, I can't think what the third time was. Anyway, third time was really the kind of flatline, enough was enough.
Chris, there's a question here.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just
No, it's fine.
Gobbling away.
During this time where you've got great self-awareness, obviously there's now reflection, but during that time where you think, and no, I'm not in a great place, or this is not sustainable. Was there a person or a place that you shared your inner thoughts with that you probably didn't share with your crew?
I think when it surfaced and I went into the mania side, and as I said, I was, conspiracy theories, numerology, everything, all these subjects which I had absolutely no draw to or affiliation to at all. I would become I'd almost become kind of not dictatorial, but a lot of people might say I was like a dictatorial, but I just wanted to share it. Don't you see the world like this? Don't you see the world like this or this or this? And it was more on that level rather. I tell a lie. I don't tell a lie, but I remember quite rightly. There was one man that I did say at one point, "What the hell is happening to me?"
Yeah.
And that was he's an amazing man called Philip Wells, and he's a poet. And he's also the resident poet at Chelsea Hospital School in London. And he works with terminally ill and traumatized children using poetry and word. Incredible man. He's gone through his own journey as well. And I remember standing in the upstairs bar looking and going, what is happening? What is happening to me? Am I going mad?
Yeah.
And I think that was the only person that I reached out to, or even question. I think we sat, if I remember rightly, I think we sat down at a quiet moment and he just asked me to start writing. And that's when I think I knew that I could start writing, but something to kind of bring the expression out. And I think we started writing, he started writing poetry. And when I write poetry, it comes out like I'm talking like this. It just comes out. And if I look back at the poems I've written, there isn't a correction or anything else like that. It literally is comes out in and out of me. And I think that was what we did at that time. As I said again, I wasn't taking care of myself. And so the thing is, by not taking care of myself, there must have been a part of me that wasn't, caring the other side. And because the high was so high and as Heston Blumenthal has talked about a lot. In fact, someone sent me the Heston Blumenthal chef has sent me a thing today from his interview with This Morning, because he was diagnosed as bipolar last November, November 23. The same time I was in a section here, and he's talking about it, and he's talking about, when you're in that high, and he's quite right, you feel like Superman. It's like everything makes sense. You've got ideas streaming, you're doing this, it's, your sleep pattern anyway is out of sync anyway, but you've got this unbridled energy.
Good way of putting it, unbridled energy.
Unbridled energy, which you ride on it. I mean, it's bareback. I mean, it's you definitely ride on it. It's bareback. So for anyone else to come in and take that away from you, or kind of say, "Hey, hang on a second," it's like, what do you mean? It's like, he calls it like, a toy you've been taken away from a impetuous child. That's definitely the other side of the coin. You do almost defend it with venom. Everyone, with bipolar, everyone seems to have a different journey. When I was sectioned, I met a lot of people that were, Jesus Christ, John the Baptist, all that kind of stuff. And being in a mental health hospital in itself is an experience I wouldn't wish upon anyone.
So your parents, how much knowledge did they have? Did they try to support you? Did you reach out to them?
Oh, I mean, they were looking back. I mean, at the time, they were interfering.
From your perspective?
From my perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, why couldn't they see the world like this?
Yeah.
They actually, what they put up with and what they stepped into and what they supported me with was extraordinary. People don't get that kind of support from, friends, family, all that kind of stuff. Business colleagues go, well, this is something I can't handle. And they tried to educate themselves as much as they possibly could, but they also tried to get me the best possible care. And it was a dance between, private care. Well, it has its own equation.
Yeah.
And thus its price. When you go into the NH system, it's much more draconian. It's a much more draconian system. It's like, I think they're ill-equipped. They still are. I think they still are ill-equipped. And so I was kind of given the opportunity the first or second time. I went through the private care system and the NHS system. I mean, they're not something inexhaustible fund of money that can just keep throwing money at it. And also at some point, their lesson was, well, hang on a second, here we go again. He's got to work his way out of this one. And they were still there. But you shatter the trust and then you build it back up. You shatter the trust again, and then you build it back up. And trust is, love and trust are very intertwined, but trust fundamentally is an incredible foundation and baseline. You can still love someone. It's like, that's Chris, or but trust is a very thing, because it presents so much. I think it brings so much of the other person into the equation, and some people just, it's like my staff, they turn around and said, great, but no cigar. Basically they said, if you come back while you're still unwell, we're walking out. And I went, okay, I'll do it myself. And literally kind of, I wasn't going to be threatened. Whereas you become very inside, you go through this weird medium of being astute, you go from an elevated to a heightened, to being really deeply insightful, to being totally sightless. And that hits everyone at different levels. Everyone at different levels. It's I mean, the episode that I had recently, I mean, I was just evil, absolutely evil. Whereas I wasn't like that 20 years ago.
Are you able to share more about the recent episode, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still very much in the rebuilding journey. We've talked about this. It happened in 23. So 2023. Unbeknown and unaware to me. I mean, I was playing around with the medication. I wasn't being strict and grounded about my medication, which was my put at risk. And particularly, statistically, 60% of people who have bipolar come off their medication. I'm not saying that's an excuse to fall into that category, but I was messing around. I was playing Russian roulette with my medication. And as I said to someone the other day, in terms of playing Russian roulette, instead of having one bullet in the chamber, I had five. So it was very much the liability was much greater.
Yeah.
And I mean, well, you moved here and you know what life is like here. I mean, it's a new foundation, but it's when you get momentum, when you get, there are so many incredible people, diverse and all from around the world, fascinating, interesting. It's not just about, as you say, coming in for a quick holiday and going out. Living here is a very different thing. And I had this amazing life. I mean, I had incredible friends, and some new and some old. I mean, one reason why I came to New Yorker was because I found London so oppressing. It was not something, and I'm a photographer, so one, it was incredibly challenging on that respect. Two, I've been doing a lot of yachts over my photographic career, and that was building up much more momentum.
Yeah.
And so obviously this is the mecca of yachts. I mean, in terms of the industry, it's a sizable chunk of the Northern Hemisphere yachting industry is based here. It's not just the glam of Cannes or Monaco. And one of my oldest friends and dearest friends was here, and there were a couple of other people, and I came down for a trip, and they said you should move here. So I had this wonderful foundation of friends, the opportunity to really build on my photographic career. I had to find a home away from home, and so I stayed with a great friend who was a yacht captain, who I met coming out of the Bedford, who also weirdly lived just up the road in Ballantrae.
Well, that's
when I had my interview, he said, I know the Bedford.
Yeah.
And born on the same day as me, although younger. And so I had I had a beautiful flat and everything else. And I think my elevated mania, I was so much in the center of this, I suppose, the hurricane that was happening. To me, everything seemed normal and height, and I had so much. I was kind of euphoric. I went kind of happy to euphoric to mania to psychotic.
Okay.
And I saw myself less and less. So it would have been building up probably June, July. It was a couple of years after my mother's death. Did my mother's death have an impact on me? Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. It had a colossal impact on me, and I was able to lean on, not much. My father and my mother were married 62 years.
Wow.
And my sister and my father were there, and I was away on a job, but I wouldn't have been. My father said your mother would want you to do this. She had a massive stroke, but we talked about that.
Yes.
And I don't think I ever really stepped into that grief. I think I suppressed it and I pushed it down, and I didn't. Okay, at that time I was 55, but it just tore the heart out of me, and I think that was then the momentum that there might have been a kind of seed that was momentum that started happening. So when I really, I mean, in my height, I was driving around everywhere and everywhere. We go and wait and go to Palmer Airport because I felt it was the most energetic and wonderful place to be. I had the answer to everything. I had the answer to everyone else. My weight was dropping dramatically, although I couldn't see it.
Okay.
It wasn't, a lot of people they question the drugs because I was smoking marijuana, but people said, you must be on coke or something wrong. No, you weren't. I mean, psychosis is a drug in itself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, I couldn't self-medicate myself with marijuana because I just would just keep going up, although I was. But it was not providing any solace. I never at any time questioned it, although I was questioned. And those questions have been presented over the last 5 years. Dear friend of mine has, sat me down and said, you're going a bit high, and okay, I've been defensive about it, but I've heard it, and I've managed to do that. But then again, I wasn't being regimented about my medication, and I just literally just kept spiraling up, and I got arrested. I got arrested at Palmer Airport, and and then charged with resisting arrest, injuring a policeman's finger, and also became threatening, verbally became threatening to a poor woman in Santa Catalina. And but again, these were things that I was not recognizing at all. I have very little memory of all that period. That's what's so terrifying, the disassociation of my mind.
Yeah.
Which now, I suppose, the worst thing, which is now, in a way, to a lot of people, has defined me. And that's, again, which is really harrowing. I think that's an understatement about how I feel about it, is that, it didn't matter if I'd known someone for 40 years, 30 years, 20 years, 4 years. Those few months, and they are a few months relative to my age, have now seemed to absolutely, to some people, imperceptibly defined who I am. And so many people tried so many things. They tried to get police intervention. They tried to do this. They called the British consulate. No one could do anything. I was like this radioactive soap bar, and no one could catch me. And they all decided that the best thing to happen was it had to run its course. And they were fearful that I was going to kill someone. They were fearful I was going to kill myself. And I'm not saying, kill someone as in
yeah.
I'm talking about driving around in my car, just no boundaries at all. And so I went through that, and I ended up with a restraining order against me, and they kind of froze my driving license and so I suddenly couldn't even go back to my own apartment. So I kind of went there, gathered some stuff, chucked it all in the car, and escaped to Ibiza. And I was there for a couple of weeks, staying in a friend's house. And I started staying in a friend's house, but then it was my mania was too high, and he was going through his own trials and tribulations. Okay. And I rented an apartment, and then it was and I borrowed his dog, beautiful dog, beautiful husky wolf called Kaya. So, but in a funny way, she kept me around. But then, all these things were absurd. I mean, they're utterly, utterly, utterly absurd. I mean, someone filmed me dancing at the airport, Palmer dancing around my car, and that got 250,000 likes on TikTok.
Okay.
Subtlety was not an equation. Yeah, subtlety was not an equation. And and then the police, they finally, behind the scenes, they got the police to come to where I was in Ibiza, and the doorbell rang. I looked through the spying eye of the apartment door, and there was 2 policemen, 2 doctors, someone else, and the receptionist. And there was something at that point in me that just went, okay, I'm done here. There's no.
He conceded.
Yeah, I think there was something inside me that just conceded.
Yeah,
and I was taken, and I was taken to a hospital in Ibiza. And yeah, I mean, they signed me in, and I was there for 5 weeks, which was awful. Not speaking Spanish, they only speak Spanish. Not speaking Spanish, no therapeutic care. It was just medication, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And my weight dropped anyway. So that's what I'm saying. My weight dropped not because I wasn't eating; it was because my metabolism was going at 1,000 miles an hour. Literally 1,000 miles an hour. My metabolism wouldn't keep up with it. So I lost so much weight, which again I thought was impressive. I looked in the mirror. It's amazing. Yeah. But actually I was deeply ill.
So your mum had passed.
Mum passed, yeah.
Your relationship with your dad, was he still in contact?
My relationship with my dad, my relationship with my dad was very good up until that point. But when I became manic and then psychotic, he became the absolute focus of my vial. He became, my absolute nemesis. And how he's still talking to me, it shows, the extraordinary nature of the man as my father. It's obviously done some irreparable damage to it. And yeah, he became the target for everything. But then he became the target for everything, then everything became the target for everything. I was thinking about it the other day. we talk about people saying they live their life and they live. And I thought, well, it's such a fractional change. If you take the word live and you just shift those letters around a bit, you've got a veil. And then if you shift them around again, you've got a vial. And if you shift them around again, you've got evil. And it's such a fine line between all those different things. And I kind of went through that escalation. I was living what I believe was my best life. And as Denzel Washington said to Will Smith after he slapped Chris Rock, he said, when you're at your highest, that's when the devil will come. I didn't respect both the luck and the love that I had. Because if I had, I would have looked after my medication, preserved that. When you think, 1,800 milligrams of lithium, I wouldn't have met you. But there's something psychologically that I battled with, and I'm okay, Jack. And when I felt okay, I was like, that's the last thing I need to put inside me. And then meanwhile, the balloon's shooting up into the sky. And yeah, it was brutal. Basically, the people that I became most venomous towards were the people that, one, were my dearest and people I love the most, and also were the people trying to help me the most. And no one was left untouched. I mean, it didn't matter if it was a family, it didn't matter if it was friends, it didn't matter if it was work colleagues, it didn't matter. Well, I say strangers. It was, Heston's similar to a spoiled child. Well, I was acting way beyond that. And I was, as my dear friend Hamish said, who never let go of the balloon. He didn't matter what I threw at him. He never, I think I would be I think I'd be a name on a tombstone if it wasn't for him.
Okay.
And he wasn't going to let go. There's something inside him that wasn't going to let go. And unconditional love is beyond measure. Unconditional love is beyond measure. And, not only was he living his life and doing what he had to do in his life to be best, but he was also having to deal with mine tearing apart around it. And, remarkable. He's a man from, he's a heaven on earth. And there were very few people, because everyone we had to step back. We can't do it. And I kind of weaponized my phone. So I was sending manic messages. Right, I'll send it to that person. No, I'll copy it to those 30 people. It's kind of it couldn't have been more public.
Obviously, you've had much time to think, reflect, play over a story, go there and back again. What were you really searching for? What was the need for Chris back then?
God, that's a clever question. What's I really got? That is a hell of a question. Talk about stopping me dead at the traffic lights. I think there was a huge, and maybe still is, a huge amount of suppressed insecurity. It was almost like I was both overzealous and over extreme in the fact that I wanted to demonstrate what a perfect life. You're surrounded by people who are hugely successful doing this, doing that. They've been doing it a long period of time. My life has been a scattered equation. Although all those plus I did this and plus I did that and everything else, however sometimes tangential they might feel, they all kind of led to this point. And there's something subconsciously in me that I think was ego, insecurity. I think it was everything that I'd suppressed.
Okay.
It was like lifting the lid off Pandora's box. And so on one side, you had developed this insane, because I'm actually quite a shy person. I'm actually, I prefer to be behind the camera than in front of the camera. I'm to go around kind of hard selling and all that stuff. I'm very bad at it. It's kind of like word of mouth. So I was doing everything that was directly the opposite. I couldn't have promoted myself worse.
Okay.
And people were just, literally, it was like the tornado warning. People were closing the doors and going down to the cellar. Well, not this again. And so going down the cellar before the storm was about to come through, and this tornado and this typhoon of me was just sweeping through, and it, I as I said, I can't remember a colossal amount. I always used to say, up until this point, I say, well, being bipolar, one of the curses is that you wake up the next morning, when you come back to stability, you remember what happened. And up until this point, there is so much I have no recollection of at all. Absolutely no recollection at all. I see people after the journey, and when I came back to New York, and I bump into them, and I've done it very organically because it's the shame, the pain, the fear, the hurt. That I'm at the kind of lower vibrational level of the scale. It's so intense, and so I'd see someone, they say, do you remember when I last saw you? I said, yeah, I saw you there. Oh, no, you saw me there, and it's like, holy crap. And I have absolutely no recollection of it whatsoever.
Okay.
And the landscape is very different. It's very, very, very different. So as I said, I don't think I made a very poor choice, which is probably an understatement. And I didn't respect the value of what I had. I think I got into such a kind of, well, this is an incredible normal life, that something came tearing through to say, okay, this is now, okay, it's a wake-up call. This is not, you're missing a very big thing here.
Really appreciate your honesty and openness, Chris. And see, we spoke previously, but hearing more on it today. And what's coming to me, and maybe true or not, is someone needed something to prove. Who to and why, I do not know. But when you spoke earlier about, buying the Bedford Arms, having another pub, in Bristol, is that correct?
Yeah. So, and I think you're
it's
right.
like, what's this drive? What is it? And I just felt like, who who are you proving yourself to?
To my father.
I sense that.
I think he's the ambition and the casualty. I spoke to him. We had a FaceTime yesterday, and I put the phone down afterwards, and yes, it's a very different conversation. And I have to be very acutely aware of and sensitive about it, and humble about it, and respect it deeply, because a year and a bit ago, in January, after I came out of the hospital on the 1st of January, I was, there was never going to be any contact with my father ever again, never going to be speaking, never going to see each other, never, never, never. And whatever he found within himself, because in my delusion, the things that I said and I did were so evil and so vile, and without any foundation. There were, someone said to me, the trouble is you were so articulate. And so, and
is that your weapon, your mouth, one of your weapons?
Yeah, it has been, and it clearly has been. But it's not. But I'm not even. Why am I wielding that weapon? And that's the bit that's why your question was so astute. I've looked up to my dad all my life, and maybe I think I wanted to look across at him instead of up to him, and it's not that that's not possible, but the pain and the strain that I put. Thank God my mother wasn't alive, although I'm sure she's watching over constantly. But it was something that no son should ever say or act towards their father. And it's very difficult. Saying I'm unwell isn't an excuse. It was my responsibility to take my medication, and a lot of people. That's where the line has been. Becoming ill and what happened when I'm ill is one thing, but the fact that my responsibility was to take my medication and to do that, and that's the bit which people. I think that's a lot of people is the most challenging, because you just have to do that, and I thought about it the other day. It's one, as I say, there's a statistic that 60% do. Two, once you're feeling one thing and all that kind of stuff, life goes slightly out of to the wayside. Even people who are normal, they start doing other things, whatever. But I kind of, my thought was I'm making an excuse. I mean, look, Steve Jobs had cancer. Someone said to me, well, if you had cancer, you'd have chemotherapy. We'd send you flowers to say hello. But, mental health is something that people find acutely difficult to deal with.
Yeah, very much so.
And they likened, well, but your medication, and I only thought about it the other day, and it's not again an excuse, but it's what happens when someone's got cancer and they say, well, I'm not going to take chemotherapy, I'm going to have the holistic route, like Steve Jobs, and it didn't work. Well, is it therefore his fault? And I think everything has stages and players. My responsibility was to look after my health, sleep well, do all those kind of wonderful things. And my life had been structured around that by a very silently and very caring and very loving man, as in my father, giving me the opportunity to do these things. Him also knowing that at the age of 50, 55, I shouldn't, whereas other people are looking at retiring, I'm just starting another career. So, the burden put on him as a father and a son. And yeah, for me to come out wielding this, I suppose it's reverse shame, wielding this, molten axe. And I haven't spoken to my sister, and I don't know when she'll ever talk to me again. My brother-in-law, my nephew and niece, no contact with them. My friendship base is being reduced to very kind friends, but they're equally, everyone loses their trust. They stand with, they stand in fear and trepidation, particularly women as well. I mean, I'm not trying to isolate men and women, but when you shake with such rhetoric and with such violence and frankly evil, and you say that, well, people can't unhear it. They're not going to forget it. They might forgive it, but equally, it irrevocably changes everything. I mean, I was reading something the other day about grief, and people would say to me, "Oh, yeah, but time heals all and everything else." And I would say, "Yeah, but hang on a second. Look how long it takes to get over a relationship or a lost job, or you've had an argument with someone, they're not talking to you, and it puts you in the pile. Well, you times that by 100 squared, you might get close to where I am, because there's not an area in my life that hasn't had that fracturing, and it is the most painful thing that I've ever been through, and I go through it daily. I go through it absolutely daily, because my whole purpose has been removed. Everything that was there, that was what was my anchor to living in this beautiful country, living in a beautiful city, having amazing, incredible, loving friends, and doing all things, and the social life, and this and that, and also an eclectic group of people has just been kind of crumbled down to a core. And no one else is to blame but me.
Well, I admire you for taking responsibility. I'm not sure your question, Chris, and it's not a question, I'd like to complete this sentence. Regards to your dad. I really do believe this is the root. And I'm going to say 2 words. I'd like you to complete with regards to this would have made it better. Okay? Try not to overthink. If only.
The first thing that came to mind is if only I'd taken my medication and looked after myself.
But what about your relationship with your dad? That's your responsibility to you. You said earlier about wanting to prove to your dad, look across to him rather than look up to him. So there's definitely been a tension between you and your dad. So for you, what would have made life easier but take it away? If only.
Only. Do you know what? I'm absolutely flummoxed by that.
But it may come to you later. I mean, not putting words in your mouth. Sometimes it could be speaking generically. If only you loved me. If only you said well done. If only you supported me. If only. But there's definitely something between you and your dad, from your perspective.
Because I treasure all the time I spend with him, all the time I used to spend with him. And this, only seeing him once over the last year and a half has been killing, especially when there was the silence.
Yeah. Okay, may come to you later, but I believe it's important for you, because I often say, like, putting the game, therapy room, it's not a counselling session, but every relationship's based upon needs. And hearing your powerful story, it sounds like there's a missing need between you and your dad from your end. And this doesn't mean he's not a good father at all, but
No,
to have
no,
that
it's not that.
and that frustration, it's
I mean,
coming out.
as a parent, we're only
Yeah.
parents for the first time.
Yeah.
And we have our molds, a lot
Yeah.
of people.
I believe you.
It's kind of like all I can think of is anyway. It's actually not for him. It's for me. If only I listened and not reacted so much, and if I truly treasured and respected, not feared or worried or was seeking something else, our relationship would be very different. Because he's never dropped the ball.
Yeah.
And he definitely placed it on the ground last January, but then we moved back into a path. But he said he said you got to do it on your own, But I was pleading for help, and he said, as you pleaded, I'm here as your father. But it wasn't, and that was really.
Sounds like an amazing man.
Yeah, he is. He really is. He truly is. Actually, he really is. And where I either lost sight of that, respect for that, or I felt that I needed to achieve to be better than him, and if I couldn't be better than him, then I'm going to destroy everything. I don't know. But if only I'd listened more and said less.
Okay. Wise words. Listened more, said less.
Said less. Yeah.
Imagine if we all did that.
Yeah, that's true.
So where are you now? So you're rebuilding. Okay. What places? What places Chris now got in terms of going forward? Where are you at?
It's brutal. I'm having to rebuild my life. I've now kind of put a support structure around me. I went into rehab in England, not really necessarily drug. It wasn't about taking drugs. It was the front runner. It was why I wasn't taking my medication more. Where was that mindset? I felt it was important to come back here to face up to my consequences and to face life like that. And people have been amazing. I mean, obviously, there's not the big wide open doors and did it, and the fanfare is back. And I have to also respect the silence. But I just felt that it was important to come back here. I mean, I love New York. It's my home. The future is uncertain, but I just felt at least this year was to come back and get emotionally and physically fit as possible. Because when our energy changes, the energy with other people changes. And I can't do that from, London's. I said I'd rather be lonely in New York than alone in London. So it was that equation.
Yeah.
Because it's been great. And I had this amazing friend of mine, Nina, who I've got to know more over time, but was the only person who put up her hand and said, come and stay with me. And I was with her 5 months. I was basically living on her sofa for 5 months. So yes, it's all about the baby steps back and doing what I can. The reason we met was because I went in to go and have a chat to a lovely couple of people at Wave, and Sarah, and say hi, and we were all talking. The football suddenly came up, and then I said I'd throw my hat into the ring and take photographs. And so it's all that. But at the same time, I'm carrying such the burden of shame and anxiety. It's perpetual. I'm sitting with it much more than I did last year. The beginning of last year, well, for a long time last year, suicide was the only thing I could see as the way out. So I'm very glad to be here. I'm very pleased to be here.
Oh.
But I feel it every day. It's still very much working on my nervous system.
Okay. Well, we're very pleased you're still here. And there's so many things to take from this, but what I really do take and admire you for is that you return to face the consequences.
Yeah.
And that says a lot about you and how your dad still remained a father to you.
Yeah, he's been absolutely extraordinary. Yeah. And people have to protect themselves. And he's
sure. Well, thanks so much, Chris. I hope and I pray that with your family relationship, slowly and surely they'll reconnect, rebuild.
Thank you, mate.
And the fact that you haven't shied away, chose to live. It's a choice.
Yeah.
And you've chosen to live.
Yeah.
You've chosen to face your consequences and to rebuild and
to talk about it.
And there's so many other Christophers out there who need to hear this story for encouragement, for strength, and think, okay, I'm not alone, because we don't plan to be in these dark places, but we often get there. Thanks so much for sharing the story.
Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate it. Thank you.